Hi.
And welcome to Lily High on Life. Our special guest today, Evan Thornley. Evan, welcome.
Thank you, Lily. It's great to be here.
I'm very excited about talking to you. You have...
Oh, well, good. So I'm excited to be here, so we're in good shape.
It's a good place to start. If the energy's good, it stays good. If I saw you walking down the street, I would think, oh, what a lovely Jewish man. Because you're obviously Jewish, you're wearing your kippah, you've got your tzitzit, all of that. But you are not what you appear to be. Or actually you are, plus a whole lot more.
Sure.
So let's start with what you're doing right now. And you've recently converted to Judaism, but it's your second conversion. So tell us about that story.
Two laps of the track, right? So I started my conservative conversion 10 years ago at Kalat Nitzan. And as I was completing that, actually, I realised that I probably wanted to do an orthodox conversion as well. And,
while you were doing it?
Yeah. And I went and saw someone at the Orthodox-based inn, and they said, well, that's lovely, Evan. Why don't you finish the one you've started and then come back if you still want to do the Orthodox? So I did.
What was it about that first conversion that tipped you off that you might like a different one?
Well, I think, and firstly, I had a wonderful experience with my first conversion, and the folks at Kalat Nitzan were wonderful and welcoming to me, so I have nothing but great things to say about that experience. But during that time, I started reading a lot of Rabbi Sax's work, and I think I've read all 25 of his books. And
Rabbi Sachs, who is now Oliver Shalom,
yes,
was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom for many, many years.
Yes, and just a towering figure, I think, in modern Jewish history and thought. And anyway, one of his early books called Arguments for the Sake of Heaven was actually about the history of the fragmentation of Judaism. Judaism, like all religions, had to deal with the clash between tradition and modernity. And as with all religions, that led to sort of three answers to that question: either reject modernity in favour of tradition, reject tradition in favour of modernity, or try and get a middle path, right, that marries tradition and modernity. And so he sort of described the way Judaism had fragmented as having elements that represented all of those. And he had a sort of critique of all the different parts of Judaism, including his own, which I guess we'd call modern orthodoxy. But one of his concerns was, well, whatever differences, there's always been a great diversity of opinion within Judaism, but one of the real tragedies now is that we cannot agree even about who is a Jew. And that's a recipe for problems, right? And I really agreed with that. I thought, well, that's right. And so I realised I wanted to be united with all the Jewish people, not just half the Jewish people. And in order to do that, I needed to do an Orthodox conversion. And so that was my original sort of motivating factor.
So we'll go into some more details of your life, but what was it that made it a priority that you actually went and did it? Because, you've got a feeling, you want to, you think, but life is busy, and especially yours. What was it that made it a priority at that time to actually do it?
Oh, gosh. I've never heard it phrased in that way. That's an interesting question. I think when you feel so drawn to something that you really want to do, in a weird way, that's one of the few things I've done just for me, right? Like, I've been a single dad for a long time, and I'm very close with my girls, and you obviously do a lot, as any parent does, for your children. I start businesses and organisations, and as the founder, you tend to give a lot to others, and I guess my conversion was really purely something that I wanted to do that I thought would make my life better and make me a better person. So that was very motivating. And you make it, you try and make things a priority. Did you
sit down and discuss it with your girls? Three of them. You've got twins and a third one.
I do. Yeah. Look, I didn't discuss it with them in terms of what do you think, or will you be okay with it? Because I felt it was my decision. But, I mean, we absolutely talk about stuff a lot. And, I mean, they've been with me to Israel 5 times now. They join me for Shabbat dinner a lot.
Was it a shock to anybody that was close to you?
Not a shock at all. I mean, given how... this is the end of I always like to say I had 40 years in the wilderness, right? It was a 40-year journey from beginning to end for me in Judaism, which has some symbolic benefit. But it was the least surprising thing, I think, to anyone, especially my girls. I'd been to Israel 36 times before my Orthodox conversion. So, and
you were worldwide CEO of Israel
at Better Place, yes,
at Better Place, an Israeli startup for electric cars, or stations?
for charge networks for electric cars, yes. And I took over from Shai Agassi, the founder, late in the piece, unfortunately, when things were probably too far gone. But I'd been on Albert Dadon's Australia-Israel Leadership Forum. I'd led an Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce delegation to Israel. I actually first went to Israel as a young student politician, just after I was president of the student union at Melbourne Uni, on a young political leaders tour in 1990. And so, I've had a long relationship with Israel and
the Jews.
Yeah, and the Jewish community. And, I might say those programs were very effective. So I was on that particular year. My successor as president of the student union was also on that trip, an old friend, obviously, and who's Richard Marles, who's now Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, and a great friend of Israel. So I just say that those were good investments that our community made many years ago.
Really paid off. Do you remember, because Israel's an amazing place. Everybody has to visit at some stage, no matter what your politics
absolutely.
Or what your beliefs are. But Israel, for me also, because I've been many times, is all the amazing fun stuff that you don't get anywhere in the world, like getting drunk on watermelon instead of alcohol and dancing on tables and little dive bars. Do you have any memories like that from either your early days or even your last trip?
Oh, look, I have some crazy memories. The last time I was there with my girls, we were there over New Year's Eve, actually. And we end up at Machane Yehuda over New Year's Eve, right? And the market closes down, and then the place just filled with, I think, mainly birthriders, actually, but it was just the wildest party I have ever seen. So that was pretty cool.
That's great.
Yeah, but it's interesting for me, for my own personal evolution. We'll go back to some of my story, but as a young left-wing political activist, as I was in my days in student politics and president of the student union, when I first went to Israel, what excited me was the kibbutzim and the histadrut, right? And the idea that you had labor people running the military. I thought this is really different. Funnily enough, as I went back to Israel years later as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, what excited me was the tech economy and everything that had happened since. So I guess my own life had evolved over that time, and funnily enough, as had Israel.
So you actually lived in Israel while you were because you were global CEO?
Briefly, yes. I mean, I took over from Shai, when Better Place was already in very serious trouble. So I was only there for about 4 months. But
is there a difference running a business in Israel to anywhere else in the world, or not really?
Look, I would have to say I found Israel a tough place to do business. It's a tough business environment.
Can you pinpoint what it was about the environment that made it tougher?
Yeah, look...
The people, the environment?
I don't know, the culture had a lot of, if I can use a Spanish word, a lot of machismo. It was a very... kind of, having spent a long time in Silicon Valley, we used to talk a lot about what we used to call co-opetition. It's like, yes, I'm competing with these people doing similar things to me, but we're also cooperating. Like, our job is to build this industry or build this space, as it's often called. And so you did as much cooperating as you did competing.
Right.
And I think my personal experience in Israel was that it was more competitive and less cooperative business environment. But look, my time there was fairly limited and was in a particular.
Do you have friends? Do you still
situation.
have friends that you made at that time that are still friends today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, I don't want to go into politics or environmentalism or anything like that, but just very quickly,
yes.
Since you were leading in the industry,
yes.
Do you see electric cars as being viable for the future?
Oh, they're completely inevitable.
Really?
They're completely inevitable. I believe that then, I believe that now. I mean, we used to say, this is not complicated. The cost of gasoline is going up, the cost of batteries is going down. We know how the movie ends, right? And that will be true, but it's completely inevitable for other reasons.
I'll take that debate with you off when we finish just curious.
I mean, here's the interesting thing, if I can take a minute to explain
sure.
The dynamics of the automotive industry. When the European Union says we're banning all gasoline cars from, I don't know when it is, 2035 or 2040, sometime a long way in the future, everyone goes, yeah, whatever. But here's how it works. If you're an automotive company and you invest billions of dollars in a new platform, then you want the models off that platform to sell for at least 10 years. And in order to sell a car, the people who are buying that car need to know that there's a second-hand market for that car some years after they buy it. So if there ain't a market for a second-hand car in 2040, then you're not going to buy it in 2035. And if you're an automotive company that's going to deliver a car in 2035 on a platform that's run for 10 years, then that's a platform that goes into market in 2025. And you took 6 or 7 years to engineer that platform. So you started engineering that platform in 2018. So when the European Union says we're going to ban gasoline cars, I may have the date wrong, but at some time it seems a long way in the distant future. Actually, what's happening is every car company in the world has already basically stopped engineering new gasoline cars. So the transition is completely inevitable. Whether you think that's good or bad, you can debate, but I'm just saying that that's what's going to happen.
My but about it is that even now there's a shortage of electricity in Europe, more so than in America and Australia. So if you've got a shortage of electricity anyway, how on earth are you going to service even the most gorgeous, newest pumping stations when there's no electricity to put through?
Clearly the world is going to have to create a lot more generation capacity, and clearly there's a lot of debate about what the right generation sources are. But but I do think in terms of where the automotive industry itself is going. that path is now basically set.
Listen, I'm most of the businesses I've been involved in have been bootstrap started and grown, and so I'm very pragmatic, although I realise how beautiful some of the business plans and forecasts are of these great corporations, and having been in many discussions with top lawyers and everything about all of this stuff, I don't believe it, and I don't think something has to look pretty. I believe it has to make common sense.
Sure.
Which is why I'm so fascinated in some of the other things you've done, because as you mentioned, you tipped your toe into politics, for goodness sakes. Tell me about how that happened and what.
Yeah, look, we'll come back to business. I would say things have to be common sense, but they have to be grounded in the underlying economics, and that was something I learned at McKinsey over many years. But politics, look... all
right, let's just stay with McKinsey then. We'll go back to politics. McKinsey gives you an amazing global education in business. Talk to me about that and how and why you got a job with them.
Well, that was interesting in itself, actually. I did a law degree at Melbourne Uni, law and commerce degrees. I got my articles lined up, ready to go to Mallison's and go and do law. But I was thinking maybe I'd do an MBA and go into business, because what I really wanted to do was own newspapers. And so I thought, to do that, I need to go into business. And so I thought I needed to do an MBA. And so I started talking, when I was talking to the law firms about being a lawyer, I said, look, I actually want to do an MBA. Would you guys be, supportive of that? and Mallesons were actually, which is why I went there. But as I was talking to a friend of mine about an MBA, because he'd finished one, he actually turns out was working at McKinsey, and he said, well, you should come to McKinsey, man. You're like, this is made for you. And so I got talking to him. I thought, oh wow, this sounds great. So little did I know that they interview 1,000 people and gave out 9 jobs, right? So I guess, like all things in life, it's always good to not know how hard things are when you start them. I'm a mad entrepreneur. I've done 14 startups. If you knew when you started them how hard they were going to be, you wouldn't do any of them. So I didn't know how difficult it was to get a job at McKinsey, thank goodness. So I did 9 interviews and they actually gave me a job. And so that was great. Ironically, the funny thing was I ended up not doing the MBA because I did my 2 years and then they send everyone off to Harvard and Stanford and stuff to do their MBAs. And I'm like, but hang on a minute. Then we come back and keep doing what we're doing now. Well, what do I need to spend 2 years and $1 gazillion doing an MBA for to do what I'm doing now? You should just let me keep going.
You always had a Yiddish cop.
You're right. and funnily enough, they did. So I just stayed at McKinsey and a bunch of my colleagues went off and did MBAs and then came back 2 years later. And of course, I was further advanced in my career. But, it is, as you suggest, it's really one of the great business finishing schools. And I learned a huge amount. Some of the simplest things, though, are the most important. So, I always like to say to people, the first thing I learned at McKinsey was to separate the big numbers from the small numbers. You can get all caught up in a whole bunch of stuff, but it's like, okay, what's the big number on the page?
Yeah.
And what isn't? And let's focus on what moves the big numbers, And one of the related things that I think I learned, and there's always stayed with me, is what is driving the economics of an industry? How is value created? Where is the real money made and why and how? Because there's so much going on and you can know all about the operations of a business, but not really understand how it makes its money and what the underlying drivers of that are. And if you don't understand that, you can be very busy for a long time and not create value.
And you get started in a project and you stay with it till it's finished. So it could be anywhere from 6 months to 6 years. Is that the way it works?
Yeah. Look, at the time I was at McKinsey, it was mainly relatively short-term studies, but then you'd often do a follow-on study with the same client. So you do 3 or 4 months. But then, I stayed on. My second client for 2.5 years over 4 or 5 studies. So yeah.
Do you recall or do any light bulb moments pop out at you where you were involved in any kind of project, whatever it was, and you thought, okay, that really surprises me, or that's how things really work?
Well, I'll give you a good example. McKinsey's fanatical about client confidentiality, and I always respected that, but this is 25 years ago, so I don't think I'm breaching any secrets at this point. We were doing some work with BHP Petroleum, and they were considering their global portfolio of petroleum assets, of upstream assets, so oil and gas exploration. And this is in the spirit of understanding how and where you make money, right? So if you asked, and it was a very well-run company, it was BHP, right? And they had some of the best platform engineers and best geophysicists, and they really knew their stuff.
So did Exxon.
Yeah, right. And that was all fine. And so you'd say, well, you'd talk to the senior leadership about, what do you think is special about your company and why do you do well? And they'd tell you, well, our platform engineers do this or we do that. Anyway, I, as the junior woodchuck on the team, I analysed the financial performance over the previous decade, and I came back with a completely different answer. I said, actually, it seems to me that you make money in the jurisdictions where you get favourable treatment under the fiscal regime from the governments. So actually, the places you've ended up making money, particularly, turns out, Australia, and to a lesser extent the North Sea, were places where you had great relationships with government and then negotiated good fiscal terms on your acreage. And then, yes, the quality of your platform engineering and your geophysics was roughly the same everywhere, as it was with your competitors, the Exxons and others. The difference of where you made money and not was actually in government relations, which nobody wanted to hear and nobody felt. But, that was just that. So this is, I think, a good example to me. And it was quite a, this was quite a big shock to a lot of people.
Yeah, the fact that you would even pursue something that was already established as being a fact is also a great credit to you and to McKinsey for allowing it.
You try and follow the facts where they lead, and not the biases. And I just looked at the numbers, in detail, and then tried to figure out what had happened, and it became very clear. So I think that's a good example to me. That was an early example in my business career of learning to understand what really drives value, and even people with decades of experience and operational expertise don't necessarily see behind the business as to what's driving value.
When you went in on any of your projects, did you ever look at what streamlining the business would be like, cutting back on staff, making sure everybody was in fact giving, there was value in the salaries that were paid?
Oh, look, McKinsey certainly did a lot of that work. We used to do what were called AVA analysis, activity value-added analyses, and studies of that type within the firm. I didn't turn out to work on those types of studies. I tended to work more on growth strategy projects. So
the reason I asked...
I didn't so much. I'm sort of moderately familiar with the methodology, and I had friends that worked on some big assignments that, their golden rule was, 40% reduction in compressible costs, and how do you get to that? And running my own businesses, I've had to do that. I took, my first company, LookSmart, which was a, significant publicly listed tech company. We went through the tech crash,
which was amazing. How did you start LookSmart?
We had to let 162 people go on one day. January the 8th, 2000. I still remember it was a tough day, but it was the right decision for the business. So I've had to live through that a few times.
Well, I asked the question from a personal perspective. Yeah, right. I've always wanted to ask somebody because it seemed to me, I did a few entrepreneurial things when I was living in America and all of that, and it seemed to me that large companies, corporations, seemed to have people that were just wanted to keep their jobs. They wanted to do enough work, and they didn't want to rock the boat, so they wouldn't look at anything different because they could lose their job if they did. And so that, to me, at the time, it is what it is, but at the time it used to infuriate me because it...
you and me both. Not just that, I would go... I'd take a more radical stance even than that. And interestingly, it's a stance that would be endorsed very much by Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, right? So this is not an anti-capitalist view. But I think that the managerial class has taken over modern capitalism at the expense of everybody else, including shareholders. I think most large public companies are run for the convenience of the people that manage them, not for the benefit of their shareholders, let alone their customers or their employees or their suppliers or anyone else. How can you have a 25% increase per annum in management compensation, shareholder returns of maybe half that, employees getting maybe 3% increases, and in most cases suppliers and others getting squeezed? So, this is a silent redistribution of wealth from everyone, including shareholders, to the managerial class. And success in the managerial class is not dictated by delivering value to shareholders. It's dictated by the internal corporate politics.
Internal individuals.
So, I've never worked for a large publicly listed company, and to be honest, I couldn't do it, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm on my 14th startup, so I was never going to be able to
So just back to that, how did... LookSmart was amazingly innovative at the time, and it listed, for a couple of billion and went up to 14 billion or something like that. But it's not
like... It was real money in those days,
not only real money, but my question is more, tell me a little bit about how and why you found that niche and how you developed it, because the billions sound wonderful, but it also sounds like it was tough going and you could have thrown it away a few times.
Thrown it away. We went within days of going broke multiple times. You talk to anyone who's had a successful business, everyone's gone through tough times. There's a lot of...
So what gets you through those tough times? What kept you going, rather?
Unreasonable persistence is my favourite phrase. It was actually simpler than that at the time. We literally we're in Silicon Valley. I literally did not have money for a ticket home if the business had folded, and it very nearly
How did you
did.
get to Silicon Valley? How did you get involved in the project? And just describe it a little bit.
So I was at McKinsey. I wanted to learn about business so I could own newspapers. And I love newspapers. So it took me a few years, and I eventually got to the media practice in New York via oil and gas and a bunch of other parts of McKinsey. And that was just at the time when the internet was just becoming a thing. So, but pre the web, right? So it was all the original proprietary online services, Delphi and CompuServe and stuff. And, you're typing, Unix commands into a command line. I mean, just not user-friendly at all. I was in the office late one night. I'll never forget this. And a friend of mine, a guy called Richard Blue, was over from the London office, and we were talking about stuff. And I'd read all about, in the sort of tech press, about this thing called Mosaic, right, which became Netscape. But I'd not seen the Mosaic browser, point and click, right, the revolution that was HTML and point and click. And I was talking to Richard at 9 o'clock at night. He said, I've got Mosaic on my computer. Do you want to see it? And I'm like, I was really interested in that. And so he fires up his computer, opens the Mosaic browser. He's a British guy. 3 seconds later, we're looking at apartments to rent in London, point and click. And I'd been doing all this complex, very user-unfriendly online stuff. And I just went, oh my goodness, this is going to change the world. And 6 weeks later, I quit my job and went for it. Like, I just felt like I'd seen the future. And, and I did a post recently on social media. About once a decade, I kind of have that experience. There's fashion trends go through Silicon Valley every couple of years, and most of them turn out to be completely bogus, and they're slavishly followed. I'm old enough to remember things that no one's ever heard of now, like push technology was the big thing in, 97, 98. No one's ever heard of it. It was not a thing, right? There's interesting stuff in the blockchain and crypto and stuff, but massively overblown. But every once in a while, something does come along that you go, oh, hang on. So when ChatGPT was released, late last year, and I was reading about it in January, and I got a bit of buzz, and I jumped on the thing for 5 minutes, and I just went, oh, wow, this is a big deal. So I think every once in a while...
So you see that as really being as continuing?
I think generative AI is a big deal. Yeah, I do.
And so it was really a matter of, like, you're doing what you're doing in Silicon Valley, and you've got this company and you really believe in it and everything, but you're just looking for the money to really give it a go. So you keep doing meetings and you keep doing presentations.
Yes.
Or
we didn't know anyone, right? So I started out, my client at the time at McKinsey in the media practice was, of all people, Reader's Digest, right? This stodgy old... and I'd become very close with the chairman and chief exec of the Digest, trying to help him modernise the business. And then I said to him, look, I'm actually going to leave the firm. I want to go and do this internet thing. And he asked me about it, and we started talking about it. And 40 minutes later, he offered me a deal with $10 million to fund it, right?
Whoa!
So I'm like, whoa, okay, we're off to the races here. So... but the thinking was basically...
So you could gather a team that you wanted.
Yeah, but I didn't really have the right people then either. But some really important people joined early on. Martin Hosking being one of them, who's gone on to do amazing things with Redbubble and a number of other tech companies. Martin was, I think, employee number 3 with us. And and Paul Bassett was my lawyer back in those days when he was at Blocks, and so we go back with all the old tech folks. But my view was, in a world of infinite information, which was what was coming at us in the internet, then search would be the power position, and that the revenue stream was likely to be direct marketing, and that all turned out to be true. And so we got involved in search very early, but I didn't know anything about venture. I didn't have any contacts in Silicon Valley, and I wasn't funded by the venture guys. I was funded by corporate. And so when Reader's Digest got itself in all sorts of trouble a few years later, and they had to get out of the business, we were left like high and dry and didn't know anyone or know how to raise money. And I had 75 days cash left in the bank and 65 people on my team, and I had to start trying to raise venture.
So what did you do?
Talked to everyone and tried to find out how it worked, and dialed for dollars, right? And I mean, I was raising 50,000 at a time or 200,000 at a time. Like, I went within 2 days of not being able to meet payroll 9 times in 6 months. We had a fortnightly payroll. We barely survived, but we got through. And interestingly, some of the money we raised was actually back in Australia. And again, I don't think it's a breach of confidentiality because it's been widely reported, but the Lieberman family, among others, were instrumental in backing us at a time when no one would, and as did Macquarie Bank. And a number of other folks. They made 100 times their money, so they were well rewarded for their faith, I'm happy to report.
It's an interesting thing, that, because I've got a friend who's unbelievably successful in America, really, for a long time in a business that needed money, and I remember a conversation where he talked about going through the yellow pages and just dialing for dollars, cold calling anybody.
I'll tell you my favourite story from that time. Okay, so it's Thursday night. I'm in the office. It's like 6 o'clock at night. I got a payroll Monday. I don't got the money, right? And I've kind of gone down my list, and I'm done. And I remembered we'd borrowed a little bit of money. We got a little bit of venture debt, as it's called, which brings up Silicon Valley Bank. That's a whole other story. But from a little firm they'd lend you money, secured against your IP or whatever you got in the office, service and stuff. And I'd heard from the person I dealt with there that one of their board members quite liked what we were doing. I'd never met this guy. His name was Larry Hootnick, and I think Larry was actually an CFO of Intel, so he was a pretty senior guy, but I didn't know. I'd heard that he liked what we were doing, apparently, when it got to credit committee or whatever. Anyway, I'm sitting there Thursday night. I'm done. I'm out. I've called everyone I know. And I'm like, there was that guy. Who that was? His name, Larry Hootnick. I'll get his phone. I'll call him, right? So I call this guy up. I've never met him, and I say, Larry, my name's Evan Thornley. You might remember you're on the credit committee and this firm, and you lent us some money, and I heard from someone that you quite like what we're doing. And he said, yeah, no, Evan, I thought it was really interesting what you're doing, and I was really excited by where you were going. And I said, well, look, Larry, we're in the process of raising some capital, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to have a chat about it. And he said, look, no, happy to, Evan, really interested. He said, I don't really just put money into things. I like to put time in, go on the board or not. And I said, Larry, that would be great. I mean, I would love to work with someone with your experience. And he said, terrific. He said, he was down in the valley. I was up in the city in San Francisco. He said, look, I'll be up in the city in a couple of weeks. We'll have lunch, see if we get along. And if we do, we'll go there. And I said to him, Larry, I'd love that. That would be great. I've got to be honest. I need the money a little quicker than that. And he's like, okay, Evan, what's your story? Where are you? I mean, he's obviously seen a lot of startups. I said, I'll be honest, Larry, I got a payroll Monday. I can't meet. And God bless him. Larry Hootnick, a man I had never met, said, okay, Evan, send me the papers in a FedEx bag. I'll send them back signed tomorrow. I'll give you 50 grand. You'll get through payroll, and I'll be up in a couple of weeks and we'll talk. And that was how we met. Wow. Payroll. Now, again, thankfully, the universe rewarded Mr. Hootnick, who made 100 bagger on his 50 grand. So, but
And at the same time, when you're what was the term you used before? When
unreasonably persistent.
Unreasonably persistent, that's what you got to be. And some people have got it and others haven't.
But I mean, what else was I going to do? Like, I literally didn't have money for a ticket home.
Had you started?
Well, yeah, I left McKinsey 6 weeks after our twins were born.
So on top of this payroll thing, you had a family that you were looking to support as well.
Yeah. And so the stakes were pretty high.
And did defeat ever enter your mind, even as you were faced with all of this?
The time, but you just had to keep going. Right?
And, just looking at how do I fix it, rather
look at the world through rose-coloured glasses. No, you focus on all the things that could kill you and try and stop them doing that. And if you stop anything that can kill you from killing you, then you're still alive, right?
So it's the questions you thrust in your own mind. How do I fix this? How do I get over it?
Yeah, you
it's far more very important
relentlessly
than why.
Focused on the difficult stuff, not on the blue sky. I mean,
or the why. People go crazy over the why. The why doesn't matter a lot of times, does it?
Well, I mean, I think that's a complex question, but there are times and places, and it's important to be reflective, I think. But if you're in a crisis, then you got to do what
power
you need to
through
do.
it.
Yeah, you just got to survive.
But also the euphoria of getting that 50,000 must have been amazing.
Yeah. We had only one person. I kept the team completely. I was totally honest with my team. I didn't want anyone suddenly waking up and getting a pink slip and not seeing it coming, and maybe having families to support. So I was completely honest with the team. I update them every couple of days on how the capital raising was going, and no one left, which was amazing to me. They all hung in there. One guy left, this guy, Diraj Mati, a good guy, but he got a job somewhere else. And so we gave him a farewell. And these were pretty dark times, right? Like the company was a death's door, and you could hardly blame this guy for leaving. Anyway, so Diraj left. So we gave him a going away party, arrogance in adversity, right? So I gave him a going away party, and I gave him a Beatles record, and I said, Diraj, you get the inaugural Pete Best Award. And he said, who's Pete Best? I said, he's the guy who left the Beatles in 1962.
I did not know that. That's fantastic.
And sure enough, when we went public at $1.2 billion a couple of years later, I get this call. It's Diraj. He's like, Evan, I had these stock options, and I was wondering, I'm like, sorry, man. You left. The other guys stayed. Yeah. They're all millionaires.
It's all that. Okay, let's just pop back to your political career, because that in itself is also fascinating.
Yeah.
How did you... So it's from university days that you dipped your toe in the water into that?
Oh, very, very deeply, yeah. Look, I mean, context, okay, so I grew up in a single-parent family on welfare, so mum and 4 kids. A range of difficult things in my childhood, and I was lucky enough to escape enough of that to get a chance to end up getting to university and for things to go well for me. And if it wasn't for the welfare system and the other sort of social infrastructure that was in place, I wouldn't have had those opportunities. So I felt naturally aligned with that side of politics. And so joined the Labor Party when I was 19 years old, and that was just at the time of the Hawke-Keating government coming to power.
Did you have aspirations of
definitely.
Prime Ministership?
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but I definitely... I suppose Keating was my hero in terms of reforming the Australian economy, and so, I got very involved in student politics, ended up being president of the campus, ended up helping set up the National Union of Students. And through all of that was where, I ended up being, interestingly enough, this is a whole interesting part of the story for me, much closer with my Jewish student colleagues than I was really with my Labor colleagues. And that's where my close friendships ended up coming from. So this is, again, a long way back. The previous National Student Union, the Australian Union of Students, had collapsed because it had all this idiotic Palestine policy, and a whole bunch of people from a broad range across the political spectrum, from Michael Danby to Peter Costello and others, had tried to take the union down because it was not representing students. It was carrying on these nonsense policies about the Middle East. And so when we tried to re-establish a new National Student Union, because Dawkins was bringing in fees and stuff and students needed a voice, we wrote into the Constitution, there will be no international policy, full stop.
Wow, right? Awesome.
Right? And so, as you might imagine, the Augis folks went, yeah, great. So we became really close allies. And I was close allies with the Mugis team at Melbourne Uni. And again, some of my closest friends to this day came from those days. So... And so that's how I ended up being invited with Richard Marles and others on the Young Political Leaders Tour. And, it's still not safe for me to walk the streets of North Fitzroy at night, right? Like the ultra-left and me have hated each other for 40 years. And, when we got back, they called us the Mossad faction. And we liked it so much, we decided to call ourselves the Mossad faction.
Yeah, I have friends that call me the love child of Genghis Khan.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, so this is part of my 40-year journey, to my conversion. So was a really deep connection with Israel and with the Jewish community here in Melbourne and many dear friends. Yeah.
And you, I can safely say you're more conservative now than left-wing, or?
Yeah, look, I would say I feel very politically homeless. I mean, I left the Labor Party a decade ago.
Do you still have a fleeting or deep involvement in politics?
Well, I mean, I know a lot about politics. I care a lot about where the country's going. I have what I'd like to think are very thoughtful and well-informed views, but I don't fit anywhere in the current political system.
Understand.
Right?
I've voted Liberal all my life. I couldn't not vote Liberal last election.
Right, you know, so
and in fact, gave up membership and everything.
Yeah, I don't fit anywhere. The whole current culture war to me is kind of misplaced. The things that I think are important are just not central to either of the main political
Maybe
groupings.
you can answer this because nobody else has been able to.
Sure.
How on earth did this new idiotic wokeness, how on earth was it able to get embedded in the fabric of Australia so quickly, where you get asked or offered a different gender on a passport application, and you get materials and trainings that are CRT? How did that even happen?
Well, yeah, I can answer that, and I think I can give you a very interesting answer, actually. And again, I should say, you know, my own experiences and views on these issues are complex. Someone very near and dear to me, very, very close to me, has had a gender transition, and I care deeply about them, and have been 100% supportive of them. But that doesn't mean that everything that's happening out there I think is making a lot of sense. And a whole lot of the sort of broader identity politics stuff. Let me tell you a story because I think it's really interesting. When I was fighting with the ultra-left 40 years ago on campus, a number of them, you know, said to me at the time, and I think they were quoting Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist from the 1930s, 20s and 30s. They said, "You don't understand, Evan, we're doing the long march through the institutions." And they did, right? And I expected that they would go into the academy, into the universities and take them over, and they did. I expected that they would go into the public service and take it over, and they did. What I did not expect was that they'd go into the corporate sector and take it over. But they did. They were much more ambitious than any of us expected, right? So, you know, there's been an agenda that a group of, you know, sort of post-Marxist, you know, theorists have been pursuing for a very long time. And, you know, if there's one thing we know from Jewish history, when your enemies tell you they're going to do something, you should believe them.
And they do, yeah.
Right?
The one fantastic thing that came out of the whole COVID crisis was that it actually unveiled a lot of plans that we were not supposed to know about until decades from now. And so that gives us at least a fighting chance. Because, you know, look, I don't care if somebody's transgender or homosexual. It makes no difference. Sure. Live and let live. You live in Australia, you should be an Australian. That's all that matters, and we support each other no matter what you do. But when the United States of America has the leader of their military who is in place because of transgender, not because of his expertise, that it's like you're living in a movie, and it's scary.
Yeah, sorry, I've lost my train of thought on that.
Sorry,
we'll come back to it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So I was also going to ask you: are you still interested in owning a newspaper?
Well, yeah, I mean, newspapers, boy, what's the business model for newspapers these days? I mean, I still think the media is hugely important.
Yes.
You know, the media and the education system are really the ideological formation institutions of our society, and a lot of what's going on I don't agree with. So,
and social media is a whole new factor.
And it's got its own toxicity in so many ways. So, I remember what I was going to say, which maybe is a bit off topic from your question, but I guess just one of the examples of where I feel politically homeless is, again, not per se to take issue with some of the issues that are very popular now. I have my own and complex views on them, but I don't understand who decides which issues get all the airtime and who decides who gets none. So my personal passion, because this was my childhood and then I ended up in the same situation as a single dad, is sole parent families, right? It's tough. It is tough to bring up kids on your own. There are 1 million sole parent families in this country. There are 2.5 million children living in sole parent families, right? The degree of disadvantage that flows from that to everybody concerned is massive. Do we ever hear about that? There are, a range of other issues that are incredibly high profile that bring a whole lot of heat, light and sound. And yet, where I come from, if the progressive politics was meant to be about anything, it was meant to be about helping people who are disadvantaged get a fair start in life. And here we are staring us in the face of a massive group of people, particularly children, who start life with a huge set of disadvantages. And, that's where are my far left friends when something should be done about that? Not on the first page, right? So I just that's why I say I'm politically homeless. The things that I think are most important, and the issues that I care the most about are just not. And frankly, no one's been good on that stuff, right? I mean, Julia Gillard cut the payments to sole parent families. There's been no one there for those people.
But you know what? The biggest secret about Lily High on Life, and I keep it a secret because it's something that people have to realise and become self-empowered and take responsibility for themselves, no matter what hand you've been dealt. You can be in a horrible situation and have billions of dollars, and it doesn't matter your emotional state. So Lily High on Life is all about, and I've got writings on my website and stuff too, how to pick yourself up when you're feeling low.
Oh, look, absolutely, Leo. And when I say that, what I'm not saying is let's throw money at the problem, right? And look,
and I'm saying no because
I tried that myself. Okay, I conducted this experiment myself. I became wealthy because of what happened in my business life, and my family is not. And so I thought, this is great. I can solve everyone's problems, and I'll I don't know how many houses I bought and stuff, and I thought I can lift everyone up.
Yeah.
If people are committed to lifting themselves up and they ask for your help, you can help them, and it's a great thing that you do that. But the motivation has to come internally. It can't be imposed from the outside, and so much of what happens is throw money at the problem, and it doesn't solve the problem. In many cases, it makes it worse. Even
for mental health, I don't care if every single person on the planet has their own therapist. It's not about that. It's got to internally come from who and what you believe you are, and that comes from feeling good. And feeling good could be just a summer day and enjoying the sun, or playing with a puppy. That good feeling, you need to find where it comes into you from there.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. And what's challenging, I think, and this is partly why I care so much about the epidemic of family breakdown, is that in my observation, and there's any amount of clinical evidence for this, the degree of self-esteem and self-respect that is typically present on average, statistically, in children in sole-parent families is less than it is in two-parent families. Not in every case, of course, and this is not a criticism of sole parents at all, but it's just so, and I've battled these things myself, and so finding the internal resources and the internal self-esteem and self-respect to be able to do that is the real challenge.
And your situation, if you don't mind me saying, was not even usual, because often when there's a divorce, the financial situation stays the same for both parents. It might change a little bit, but it really got devastating for you because when your parents separated, you really went on the welfare system, which is no fun at all.
We were catapulted out of the educated upper middle class into the welfare class, right?
And
overnight.
What did that tell you about you and how did you grow up? Obviously, it had a different kind of effect than most people.
Well, yes, although I would say, and I've said this before, I think that the thing that was most difficult for me and my sisters was actually not the financial poverty, though that was real. I mean, I'm 10 centimetres shorter than my dad, right? We were malnourished as kids, literally. But was actually the emotional poverty. And, my mum and, I guess when my sisters and I were growing up, we kind of had a sense that as you grew older and you got to know other kids' parents, mum was a bit different to other people, but we didn't really understand why. And it was only years later when one of my nephews was diagnosed with Asperger's, and I didn't know much about the autistic spectrum, and my sister explained it to me, and I said to her, gosh, that sounds like mum. And she said, yeah, totally. And so we realised, I think only as adults, that our mum, through no fault of her own, was fundamentally limited in her emotional capacities.
She had additional challenges.
Her ability to form meaningful relationships with her own children or with anyone else. So there were no family friends, there were no other. And so I think for us, the emotional poverty was probably even more challenging than, yes, financially we were pretty badly off, but
and it's not. It's really. I don't personally. It's not about throwing money at the problem. It's about educating people or showing people that they can find happiness within themselves. And when they feel better, everything around them gets better. So feel better most of the time.
Yeah, and I'm obviously, you asked me if I'm more conservative. In some ways, I mean, by most people's traditional definitions, absolutely, right? I mean, I'm a religious person. I'm a person of faith, and central to that is, one of the central Jewish contributions to the world is the idea that we're all made in the image of God. And so that's, if you can really feel that and believe that, that drives an internal sense of self-respect.
Absolutely.
And that's transformative. So.
Evan, just quickly, because we're running out of time in this show. I've got to do another one with you on your faith and religion. But how did it feel? What were the things going through your mind when the first time you realised that money was not an issue, that you had enough money to buy houses for people, and what you went through as a child, which obviously still weighed in you? What goes through your mind when that happens?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. I mean, I remember exactly when it happened because we sold a bunch of shares into our mezzanine round, and suddenly I had, not huge, but enough money that I knew we were going to be able to buy a home and pay for our kids' school fees. And, that was completely transformative. Look, what I would say is this, and I've lived through kind of the entire financial spectrum. Everybody desires financial security, and everyone should desire financial security, and a lack of financial security just makes life really hard. There's a path from there to what I'll call financial freedom, where you really actually have the freedom to do whatever you want. That's nice to have. Beyond financial freedom, there's no upside. Right, there's no benefit. I certainly wouldn't sacrifice too much to get there, right? So I think it makes very good sense for people to do whatever they can to get themselves at least to the minimum position of financial security, of knowing that they're going to be okay, and that a lack of money is not going to make their lives really difficult. If you get the opportunity to get more towards financial freedom, that's lovely, but I wouldn't sacrifice too much for it in terms of family and other things. And certainly there's no particular benefits beyond that point. So
any epiphanies or just a sense of great relief off your shoulders?
I'd love to say there was, just relief. Look,
Awesome. We have run out of time, and this has been absolutely wonderful. So thank you very, very much. Really, really enjoyed your openness and your contribution to Lily High on Life.
Thank you, Lily. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.